January 17th, 2011, London. The Frontline Club, a dimly lit journalists' hangout in Paddington, is packed wall to wall with international media. Camera flashes strobe across exposed brick walls, lined with photographs of war correspondents. In the center of this chaos stands a 55-year-old Swiss banker in a perfectly pressed suit, and beside him, the most wanted man on the internet. Julian Assange is wearing an ankle monitor. He's on bail for allegations in Sweden, effectively under house arrest at the mansion of the club's owner. But today isn't about him. Today, Rudolf Elmer reaches into his jacket pocket and produces 2 compact discs. The room goes silent. Then, the cameras explode. Elmer hands the discs to Assange with the calm deliberation of a man who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. On those CDs, he tells the assembled press, are the names of over 2,000 people. Drug cartel bankers, corrupt politicians, arms dealers, Saudi companies linked to the bin Laden family, FIFA officials, and some of the wealthiest criminals on earth. All of them hiding billions through one of Switzerland's most prestigious private banks. All of them his former clients. Assange takes the discs and says simply, "This is not my news conference, this is Rudolf's." What the cameras don't capture is the look in Elmer's eyes. He has done this before. He has already been to prison once for leaking bank secrets. He knows that in 48 hours, he will board a plane back to Switzerland to stand trial. He knows they will arrest him again. He is handing over evidence of crimes committed on live television in front of the entire world, knowing exactly what it will cost him. Those CDs may have been completely empty. Elmer would later claim in court that the discs contained no data whatsoever, that the real information had already been given to lawyers, that this entire press conference was theatre, a carefully staged performance designed to draw maximum attention to his upcoming trial. The Swiss court found this claim totally unbelievable. But whether the CDs were full or empty, the message was unmistakable. Rudolf Elmer was daring them to stop him. So what transforms a man earning $212,000 a year in a Caribbean paradise into someone willing to sacrifice everything, his career, his freedom, his family's safety, to expose the people signing his paychecks? And why, when they offered him $400,000 to shut up and walk away, did he say no? To understand how Rudolf Elmer became the most dangerous man in Swiss banking, you have to understand what he left behind. Born in Zurich in 1955, Elmer was the definition of a company man. He started his career as an auditor at Credit Suisse, moved to KPMG, and in 1987 joined Julius Baer as a junior auditor. For the next 7 years, he did exactly what was expected. He checked the books, he followed the rules, he kept his head down, and he climbed. By 1994, he had caught the attention of Rudolf Baer himself, the CEO and namesake of one of Switzerland's oldest private banking dynasty. Baer had a proposition. The bank was expanding its offshore operations in the Cayman Islands, and they needed someone they could trust to run the numbers. Someone Swiss, someone discreet, someone who understood that in this business, the product wasn't investment returns or wealth management. The product was secrecy. Elmer said yes. He would later describe the moment with a kind of wistful irony. From an auditor checking the books in Zurich, he said, to the world where you can lie in the water after hard work. The Cayman Islands were everything Zurich wasn't. Warm, relaxed. A tiny archipelago of 50,000 people, hosting thousands of shell companies and trusts, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Georgetown, the capital, was essentially a series of glass office buildings, surrounded by palm trees and turquoise water, each building containing the paper trails of fortunes that couldn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Elmer arrived as chief accountant. By 1999, he had been promoted to chief operating officer of Julius Baer Bank and Trust Company Limited, the crown jewel of the bank's offshore empire. His salary hit $212,000 a year. He had a house near the beach. He had made it. But something else happened when Elmer entered senior management. He started seeing things. Once you become part of senior management, he would later explain, and gain international experience, as I did, then you are part of the inner circle, and things become much clearer. You are part of the plot. You know what the real products and services are, and why they are so expensive. It should be no surprise that the main product is secrecy. What Elmer discovered in that inner circle would consume the next 2 decades of his life. The question is whether what he found was worth destroying himself over. The system Rudolf Elmer uncovered was elegant in its corruption. Here's how it worked. Imagine you're a Mexican government official with $100 million you can't explain, or a Saudi businessman who needs to move money without attracting attention, or an American billionaire who simply doesn't feel like paying taxes. You can't just walk into a Swiss bank and deposit cash anymore. Those days ended decades ago. But you can call Julius Baer's private banking division and explain your situation. They understand. They have a solution. First, the bank creates a subsidiary in a tax haven. Not Switzerland itself, that's too obvious, but somewhere like the Cayman Islands. This subsidiary is legally separate from the Swiss parent company. Different jurisdiction, different laws, different secrecy protections. Second, your money gets placed in something called a Baer trust. This is a legal arrangement where the trust technically owns your assets, but the trust itself is just a shell. It has no employees. It makes no decisions. It exists only on paper. The real control stays in Zurich, but officially your money is in the Caymans, and nobody in Switzerland knows anything about it. Third, the Cayman subsidiary signs management agreements with other shell companies, moving profits around in ways that would make an accountant's head spin. Performance fees get assigned to entities that don't actually perform anything. Advisory services get billed by advisors who never advise. Every transaction is designed to make the money trail as confusing as possible. And here's the genius of it. When American regulators ask questions, the Swiss bank points to Cayman secrecy laws. When Cayman authorities ask questions, they point to Swiss secrecy laws. Neither country can see the full picture. Neither country can prove anything. The client's home country is completely in the dark. By the late 90s, this machine was generating up to 40% of Julius Baer's global profits. The Cayman operation that Elmer oversaw wasn't a side business. It was becoming the business. And the clients weren't just tax-shy billionaires looking to save a few million. Elmer started finding names that made his blood run cold. Names like Raúl Salinas de Gortari. Raúl Salinas was the brother of Carlos Salinas de Gortari, president of Mexico from 1988 to 1994. He was also, according to prosecutors, one of the most corrupt men in Mexican history. When Elmer pulled up the Salinas account records at Julius Baer Cayman, he found millions of dollars sitting in a Baer trust. Millions that couldn't be explained by any legitimate income. Millions that would later be traced to bribes from drug trafficking organizations. Salinas would eventually be convicted of complicity in murder. Swiss authorities would confiscate over $132 million from his accounts, money linked directly to drug cartel payments. But at the time Elmer found these records, Salinas was just another name in a very long list of very questionable clients. Then there was the CIMAC Trust. Elmer noticed it was making regular monthly transfers of $12,000 to a man named Mario Arturo Acosta Chaparro. The name meant nothing to him at first. A quick search revealed the truth. Chaparro was a Mexican brigadier general. He was also the head of a secret police unit responsible for what became known as the Flights of Death, a program of extrajudicial killings in which suspected drug traffickers and political dissidents were thrown from airplanes into the ocean. This man, this death squad commander, was receiving regular payments through one of Switzerland's most prestigious banks. Elmer brought his concerns to his superiors. He documented everything. He sent memos. He requested meetings. He explained that these clients represented massive legal and reputational risks. The response was silence, then dismissal, then, eventually, something much worse. What Elmer didn't understand yet was that these weren't anomalies. These weren't accidents. These were the clients the system was designed to serve. The arms brokers, the corrupt politicians, the drug-linked officials, the Saudi companies connected to the bin Laden family. They weren't bugs in the machine. They were the machine's entire purpose. And Rudolf Elmer had just made himself a problem. In late 2001, Julius Baer's internal security team discovered that someone had been copying client data. They didn't know who, they didn't know why, but they knew their most sensitive information might be compromised. The bank's response was immediate and absolute. Every employee in the Cayman operation was required to take a lie detector test. No exceptions, no appeals. Elmer had a problem. He was recovering from serious back surgery at the time, a spinal operation that had left him in significant pain and unable to travel. He requested a postponement. The bank refused, suggesting he was faking his condition to avoid the test. When he finally took the polygraph, he failed. 3 weeks later, still recovering from surgery, Elmer received a termination letter. The reason given was lack of trust. 15 years of loyal service ended with 2 words. But Elmer had been careful. Before his firing became official, he had made backup copies of everything: client lists, account records, transaction histories, internal memos. He would later claim this was standard hurricane preparedness, that employees routinely backed up critical data in case a storm destroyed the office. The bank saw it differently. To them, it was data theft committed with criminal intent. On March 10, 2003, Elmer's employment officially ended. He was 47 years old. He had no job. He had no prospects in Swiss banking, not after a termination like this. But he had something else. He had 169 megabytes of data that proved one of Switzerland's most respected financial institutions was helping drug lords, death squad commanders, and tax evaders hide billions of dollars. The question was what to do with it. Elmer started small. He sent documents to Swiss tax authorities. Nothing happened. He contacted German regulators. Silence. He approached journalists, but no one would publish. The Swiss financial establishment had closed ranks. Then the emails started arriving. Anonymous messages from Canadian servers. Roydy, stop talking about JBBT business. Then, from a public phone booth at the Zolikon train station, something more direct. Stop talking, otherwise we will kill you. What happened next would define the rest of Rudolf Elmer's life. In 2003 and 2004, the bank launched what can only be described as a psychological warfare campaign against him and his family. Elmer noticed he was being followed, not by one person, but by multiple teams working in shifts. He later documented at least 11 Swiss private detectives assigned to surveil him, his wife Adelheid, and their daughter around the clock. His wife was followed to the grocery store. His daughter was watched at school, with men waiting in parking lots, photographing her movements. Adelheid would later describe being offered chocolate with one hand and terrorized with the other. The contradiction was deliberate, a classic intimidation tactic designed to keep victims off balance, never knowing whether the next interaction would be friendly or threatening. Then came the email that changed everything. It was addressed to Elmer directly, and its message was simple. Rudy, if you talk about Julius Baer business, we are going to kill your daughter. There is a moment in every whistleblower's journey when they have to decide how much they're willing to sacrifice. Some people receive death threats and go silent. They take the settlement, sign the non-disclosure agreement, and disappear into quiet lives of suppressed rage. Rudolf Elmer was not that person. In 2005, he sold a CD containing 169 megabytes of Julius Baer client data to a Swiss business newspaper called Cash. Shortly after the story broke, Zurich police arrested him. He spent 30 days in solitary confinement. When he emerged, the bank made one final attempt at resolution. In February 2006, Julius Baer's general counsel, Christoph Hiestand, approached Elmer with an offer: $400,000. All charges dropped, all complaints withdrawn. In exchange, Elmer would sign an agreement never to speak about Julius Baer again, never to publish anything about what he knew, never to contact journalists or regulators or anyone else who might be interested in the bank's offshore operations. A lifetime of silence for $400,000. Elmer said no. Within months of refusing the settlement, Rudolf Elmer realized he could no longer safely live in Switzerland. The stalking continued. The threats continued. The bank's lawyers were pursuing him through every possible legal channel. Swiss media had begun portraying him as mentally unstable, a paranoid data thief with delusions of persecution. Finding work in Swiss banking was impossible. His name was poison. So the Elmer family fled. They moved to Mauritius, a small island nation in the Indian Ocean, 11 hours from Zurich by plane. It was far enough that the private detectives couldn't follow, far enough that the threatening emails became less frequent, far enough that Elmer could breathe. He got a job at the Standard Bank of Africa, running their outsourcing center. He was good at it. By 2007, he had been nominated for the bank's Superstars Award, given to exceptional employees. For a brief moment, life seemed almost normal. Then Elmer made contact with a new organization. a website that had been making waves by publishing leaked documents from governments and corporations around the world. A site founded by a silver-haired Australian with a talent for making powerful people very uncomfortable. WikiLeaks. In early 2008, Elmer provided WikiLeaks with a cache of documents detailing Julius Baer's offshore operations. The files included client names, account structures, and internal communications that painted a damning picture of systematic tax evasion and potential money laundering. WikiLeaks published everything. Julius Baer's response was swift and catastrophic. The bank's lawyers went to a California court and obtained something almost unprecedented, an injunction that didn't just remove the Julius Baer documents, but shut down the entire WikiLeaks website. On February 18, 2008, the domain wikileaks.org went dark. It was exactly the wrong move. The Streisand effect is named after Barbara Streisand, who in 2003 tried to suppress photographs of her Malibu mansion and inadvertently drew millions of views to images that almost no one had previously seen. When you try to censor something on the internet, you often end up making it far more visible than it ever would have been otherwise. Julius Baer was about to learn this lesson at enormous cost. The moment WikiLeaks went dark, the story exploded. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, and dozens of other organizations filed briefs attacking the injunction as an unconstitutional assault on free speech. News outlets that had never heard of Rudolf Elmer or Julius Baer were suddenly running front-page stories about the Swiss bank that tried to shut down the entire internet to hide its secrets. On February 29th, Judge White dissolved the injunction. WikiLeaks came back online, and now, instead of a few thousand people reading about Julius Baer's offshore operations, millions knew. The documents that the bank wanted to suppress were being downloaded and archived and discussed on every corner of the web. Der Spiegel revealed that Elmer was the source. His identity was no longer a secret, and the bank's 14 leaked documents had become the most famous financial disclosures of the year. Back in Mauritius, Elmer received a letter from Standard Bank of Africa. Dear Rudolf, we have learned of a serious misconduct that could endanger our bank. He was fired immediately. The reach of Swiss banking extended even to the Indian Ocean. But something else was happening. The WikiLeaks disclosure had triggered investigations. American regulators were asking questions. German tax authorities were demanding answers. The pressure that Rudolf Elmer had been trying to create for years was finally building. The walls around Swiss banking secrecy were starting to crack. January 17, 2011, the Frontline Club. You know what happens next, but here's what you don't know. Rudolf Elmer understood exactly what he was doing when he handed those CDs to Julian Assange. He knew that in 48 hours, he would be standing trial in Zurich. He knew that the dramatic gesture would guarantee global media coverage of that trial. He knew that even if the CDs were empty, even if the real data had already been given to lawyers and regulators, the image of him handing physical evidence to the world's most famous leaker would become the defining symbol of his case. It was a performance, and it worked perfectly. On January 19, 2011, Elmer appeared before the Zurich District Court. Outside, a dozen protesters held signs reading, "We think those who expose the distasteful side of Swiss finance need our support." Inside, the prosecution painted him as a disgruntled ex-employee, motivated by revenge, not ethics. The judge, Sebastian Eppli, delivered the verdict: guilty of coercion, guilty of making threats, guilty of violating banking secrecy. Elmer was sentenced to a suspended fine of 7,200 Swiss francs. The judge told him, "You were for many years part of the banking world and have benefited from it." Then, before Elmer could even leave the courthouse, police arrested him again. This time for the WikiLeaks handover he had performed on live television 2 days earlier. He was charged with violating banking secrecy a second time, the crime the entire world had watched him commit. He was taken to Winterthur prison and placed in solitary confinement. He would spend the next 220 days alone in a cell, the same punishment typically reserved for the most dangerous criminals in the Swiss system. During that time, he received a letter from an anonymous senior Swiss judge. The letter read, in part, "You believe in the rule of law and the state, and it is precisely this rule of law and the state that prove to you that you must not believe in it." Even the judges knew the system was broken. They just couldn't say it publicly. For years, nothing happened. Elmer remained in legal limbo, fighting case after case, enduring 48 prosecutorial interrogations, watching 70 separate court decisions.